Hello, everyone. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowery, our Mississippi State beat writer, and this is Double Coverage, a production of the Daily Journal. We're glad you've chosen to click in with us today. We're going to talk all things Mississippi State and Ole Miss in the next half hour or so. Logan, I see you wearing the baseball cap of yet another stadium that you've never been to, but how are you?
I'm doing good, Parrish. Yeah, I still haven't done any Major League Baseball games. Like we've talked about before, I've been to about 30 spring training games, and I've been to a few Major League stadiums, but they were to cover football games. So I still need to cross some of those off the list and try to make that happen sometime before I'm dead.
Well, it's a Yankees cap today in honor of 9/11, which was just a couple of days ago. Where were you on that day in 2001?
I was on Columbus Air Force Base. I was actually attending school at EMCC. They had a branch at Columbus Air Force Base. It was a small little setup that they had on base, and I was actually in history class, and we were not learning about 9/11 history. We were learning about ancient civilizations, which I thought was kind of strange. I think it was a Western Civ class, and then I moved up to an algebra class, and during the middle of the algebra class, a military base personnel bust through the door with toting an M16 and told us that any non-military personnel need to evacuate the base immediately. So that was my introduction to 9/11. So I did as the person with the machine gun instructed me to do. I left the base.
So you did not wait for the bell to ring and dismiss class. Y'all got up right away.
I did not, and that was actually our last class on that campus. We were not allowed back on base, and they had to move us. They actually moved us to Mississippi University for Women, and we started attending classes there. We weren't at the W, but we were a branch of EMCC there. So it was kind of a strange situation. Then they moved us to Mayhew for a little while, and then I stopped going to the EMCC.
Well, it's very interesting that you would find yourself on a military installation at 9/11. That's 9/11 was on a Tuesday this year. It was on a Tuesday the day it happened in 2001. I remember because I was getting ready to go down to Starkville. I was covering state at the time, getting ready to go down for the press conference, which in those days was on Tuesday every week. And my kids, one has graduated college now, and the other is about to. And at the time, I had dropped them off at the daycare or the ladies' home in our neighborhood who kept them at the time, and I had gone on to American Family Radio here in Tupelo, Logan. I did a radio show with those guys on Tuesdays for about 15 years, and we taped on Tuesday morning. Well, from dropping one off at the lady's house and another at preschool, actually, I was driving from downtown back out to West Tupelo for American Family Radio when I heard all of this on the radio. And all I had heard on the radio was a plane has hit the Twin Tower, and then the other would follow. Okay, I hadn't heard about the Pentagon at that time, so I get to the radio station, and I'm walking back to where we would record it, and I pass the switchboard, and the lady is operating the switchboard and taking calls, and I hear her say, "Yes, ma'am, the Pentagon." And my immediate thought was, come on now, you can't mess this up at a time like this. You can't give out false information. You have to be correct with the information. And then I took another step and I thought, oh my gosh, that is correct information. It's the Pentagon too. And it was just, it's one of those days where you remember where you were and what you were doing. Went on down to state, and we went through the motions of a press conference with Jackie Sherrill, and wrote the copy that we would write, and did all of those things, not knowing if the game would be played that week, and it was not. And they played against BYU later that season in Starkville in 2001. Shifting gears a little bit, Logan, let's talk about these 2-0 teams that we have. both with wins over a Big 12 opponent, dominating wins, as a matter of fact, over Big 12 opponents. Tell me about Manhattan, Kansas, man. What did you learn about your team there?
Well, I mean, obviously Mississippi State was impressive in that first week, but they were playing the FCS opponent, so they were supposed to look dominant in that game. And I was waiting to just see how they performed. They had an early morning kick out in Manhattan. It was a Big 12 opponent. I didn't think Kansas State was that great going into that ball game, and my assumptions were confirmed. They weren't very good at all. But Mississippi State handled their business out there. They had some more obstacles to overcome than just beating Kansas State. They had to go on the road, early morning kick, way away from home. There wasn't just a large turnout. It was actually more Mississippi State fans there than I thought would be, but still not a large turnout there. But Mississippi State played well, and throughout the whole ball game. Now they got some stuff that they need to clean up. They had a lot of penalties, and they still having some substitution issues that they need to get cleaned up. But outside of those two things, everything looked really, really good. Especially with the running game. Kylan Hill has been outstanding the first couple of ball games. They had another quarterback rush for over 100 yards, Nick Fitzgerald. In his first game back from the ankle injury, from the 1 game suspension, his passing wasn't that great. I mean, Keaton Thompson and Nick Fitzgerald both are under 42% passing. That's got to improve for Mississippi State to reach the level that they want to reach this season. But running the ball, you thought coming back from that ankle injury, he hasn't been hit since Thanksgiving. So, you just wondered about how he was going to react. And he rushed 19 times for 159 yards in that ball game. So, there's no lingering effects from that ankle injury at all. I mean, he looked just as fast as he ever was. He was making cuts. He was not apprehensive about running at all. But now his passing, he looked really – I couldn't tell if he was tentative with his passing or if he was overeager with his passing. But he led a lot of receivers too far. His feet were not set in the pocket. He looked a little jumpy back there. And, talking to him this week after he went back and watched the film, he was talking about, he was maybe too over anxious to throw the ball and get in that offense. So, it may have taken one game for him to settle back in, but State's offensive line dominated. And really the big key going into that ball game was, so much was made about Kansas State's offensive line. They had 5 starters back on the offensive line. They had an All-American at right tackle, and Mississippi State's defensive line just dominated them from the time the whistle blew to start the game to the time the whistle blew to end the game. It was a really dominating performance on Mississippi State's defensive line, and it freed up the linebackers. Errol Thompson and Leo Lewis both had great games, and it's just a really good all-around win for Mississippi State. And then they come home this week and get Louisiana Lafayette. I'm assuming they like to be called Louisiana. Parrish, you probably call them something else. It's just so many different names. I'm calling them Louisiana Lafayette because that's how I grew up knowing them as.
Here's the thing, Logan. If you go to the Louisiana Higher Ed website, the official Louisiana System website, they will list all of the state's universities. And then you can see their official names. And there is no such institution as the University of Louisiana. Now, it's simply what the school is trying to call itself. Now, you can look at Ole Miss and say, well, that's a nickname. That's what the school prefers to call itself, and prefers to be called in a public setting for athletics specifically. But it's different because that's just a nickname that Ole Miss has chosen, and it's not an obvious flagrant attempt to become something that the state does not recognize. That the state of Louisiana does not recognize a University of Louisiana. They recognize Louisiana Lafayette, Louisiana Monroe, who the Rebels will face in a couple of weeks there, dear old alma mater. But anyway, so that's always a topic that's interesting to me, and I'll put out something on Twitter later this week just to help people not get caught up in the propaganda there.
Yeah, I knew that was a hot button topic for you. That's why I threw it out there to you. But
red meat, man.
I know, but you mentioned that Ole Miss is playing your alma mater. I don't think Mississippi State will ever play my alma mater in football. I don't think Mississippi University for women is going to suit up a football team anytime soon. Now, they have played them in basketball a few times, and I am proud to say that MUW owns the all-time series record against Mississippi State in women's basketball.
Hey, Logan, before we get into Ole Miss here, tell me about Nick Fitzgerald in the passing game. Was he about a 55% passer last year? Is that what I remember?
Yes, he was 55% last year, and he's actually 55% for his career. And the benchmark that Joe Moorhead threw out there was 65%, and that's kind of that may be a high step. I think closer to 60% is probably more along the lines of where Fitzgerald could probably get to, but he's got to do a whole lot more in the passing game than he did in that first game. There were some big plays, and that's kind of where Mississippi State survived in the passing game those first couple of games. Is they've made some big plays in the passing games, but they need to be more consistent with those plays.
Yeah, a lot of offenses right now are designed to where a good quarterback can hit that mid-60 mark. Short passes, the different reads and things like that. What has been Fitzgerald's struggle here in the passing game?
I think just the fact that he's just anxious, and probably a little rusty on top of that. This is a brand new offense for him. He's got a strong arm, and he likes to show it off. And I think this offense is more tailored to suit him, with the downfield passing game. And that's the thing where this offense has changed so much from what Dan Mullen did. Dan Mullen did a lot of dink and dunk, a lot of those short passes, little bubble screens, and things like that. This offense has a lot more vertical passing in it. There's really not a whole lot of swing passes or screen passes or anything like that. So their completion percentage is not going to be as high as it was in Dan Mullen's offense as far as the I guess completability, if that's even a word, of the short passes versus long passes. But I think this is a different style of offense, and I think it does suit Nick Fitzgerald's arm. But at the same time, that's where he's always been lacking as far as, he came from an offense in high school. He was a high school wide receiver up until his senior year, and then he became the quarterback as a senior and then ran the wishbone. So, he's not a guy that's known for throwing the football. It's something he hasn't had to do very much in his career, and that's an area, if there is a knock on Nick Fitzgerald, it's his passing. And it's not that he doesn't have the arm strength, it's just the accuracy part of it.
All right, shifting gears, Logan, to Ole Miss. The Rebels, 76 points, but gave up 41 in a win over FCS Southern Illinois. We'll talk about that game in a moment. Alabama coming to town this week. It will be difficult for Ole Miss, which has won 5 of its last 6 games when you go back to last season, and and is 5-2. Really should be 6-1 with Jordan Tiamu as the starter. But there's that bizarre Arkansas finish that Ole Miss never seems to get a handle on. And there was one like that last year in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium when Tiamu was making his first start. The FCS game for the Rebels, Logan, we talk about it every year. Mississippi State dominated against Stephen F. Austin. You want to leave that game confident. You want to play clean and efficient. You want to run your offense and impose your will and do the things that you want to do to give yourself confidence moving to the next week. Ole Miss did that on one side of the ball. Southern Illinois was scoring touchdowns in the first half, 5 of them on 6 possessions. They scored on every possession. They scored 5 touchdowns and a field goal. Well, Ole Miss was matching them touchdown for touchdown in the first half. Finally, the Rebels were able to get a 2-possession lead, but that didn't come until early in the fourth quarter. It was a game in the fourth quarter. So Ole Miss leaves that game with that confidence on offense. But I can't help but believe a little bit of self-doubt creeps in maybe, after Southern Illinois gained 629 yards. They gave up 38 points in the first half, Logan. That 38 points believed to be the most allowed by an SEC school against an FCS opponent in one half. So not a good half. In the second half, the Rebels outscored Southern Illinois 41-3, but the Salukis gained more yards in the second half than they did in the first. They had 330 yards in the second half, but they just made mistakes. Ole Miss had not forced a turnover this season. until the fourth quarter last week, and then they forced 3, returned 2 for touchdowns. But it was an 8-point game, and Southern Illinois was driving to possibly tie the game again when Vernon Dasher stepped in front of a pass from Sam Straub and returned it 88 yards for a touchdown. So that was a 2-possession lead, and that basically removed any chance that Ole Miss would not win the game because Southern Illinois could not stop Ole Miss offensively. Logan, we've both covered teams where we've seen, well, the offense is better than the defense or the defense is better than the offense. I've not covered a team that has as big a gap between its offense and defense as Ole Miss does right now. Now, the good news for that, for Ole Miss, is that, hey, things don't always stay the same after week 2 in a season. You know, things change. I think this defense can get better. I do think that they looked bad against Southern Illinois. They played better in the second half. They didn't dominate, but at least they made the stops to keep the Salukis out of the end zone. Ole Miss has 2 games on record right now, okay? You got Texas Tech, Southern Illinois. This defense, I thought, looked okay, looked fair against Texas Tech, which is to say a big improvement from last year. I think Ole Miss fans left that Texas Tech game thinking, you know, there's some things you can work with here. Defensive line played well in that game. Secondary played well in that game. They didn't get any sacks, but they pushed the pocket against Texas Tech. And Texas Tech is a team that is going to get yards and points. That's just what they do on offense. And yes, they had a change at quarterback during that game with the true freshman coming in. But bottom line is Cliff Kingsbury didn't know who his quarterback was going to be. All 3 of those quarterbacks were repped fairly evenly. And, you know, so Alan Bowman, the true freshman, was not that far from being the starter anyway. So a fair job by the Ole Miss defense in the season opener, a step back against Southern Illinois. This will be their greatest challenge yet. And Logan, you know, I do a prediction post every Thursday at djournal.com. And I just do a lot of long and rambling dissertation about the game and, you know, and what I think will happen. I think everybody can reach the same conclusion here that Alabama will most likely win the game against Ole Miss. Okay, number one, Alabama. Ole Miss just doesn't have the defensive talent right now, I think, to compete the way they did when they won back-to-back in the series in 2014 and 2015, just a few years ago. But it's getting to the conclusion that I think will be interesting. I'm really interested to see if this Ole Miss offense, which I believe to be pretty good, can score multiple touchdowns in the game after the Rebels were beaten 66-3 in this game last year. Can this Ole Miss offense put up about 4 touchdowns? You know, can they move the ball? Alabama lost 9 starters from last year's defense. It's not the impenetrable fortress that it was a year ago, but it's Alabama. They recruit well. They're coached well. They have given up yards between the 20s this season, okay? They've given up yards in the passing game, almost 240 a game, all right? But they've been really good in the red zone. Ole Miss is bogged down in the red zone a little bit, okay? Bogged down in the red zone several times against Texas Tech. Last week against Southern Illinois, Jordan Tiamu threw for 448 yards, had 5 touchdown passes. 4 of them were for more than 30 yards. I think that's what's going to have to happen against Alabama. It would serve Ole Miss well if they took some shots from about the 30-yard line, you know, while they still have some ability to stretch the field. You don't want to get down there with, you know, 1st and goal at the 9. You know, that's going to play to Alabama's strength at that point, and the likelihood is you end up kicking a field goal of less than 30 yards. And when you're kicking those short field goals like that, you're messing up. It means you're not executing enough to get in the end zone. So anyway, I think a best case scenario for Ole Miss in this game is going to be for the Rebels to come out and play to the level they have played offensively, put some points on the board, some touchdowns on the board against Alabama that they did not do last year, right? And, you know, just do the best you can do on defense. I think that'll be a little bit better because I think they'll be amped up and they'll play above their heads to a degree. But, you know, ultimately, Alabama's offense right now is better than its defense. And that's not something you ordinarily say about the Crimson Tide, but that's where they are right now. It's very good offense. Tua Tagovailoa. We've heard all about this quarterback competition, if you will, at Alabama. But this guy is a player, very mobile, very accurate. You're going to have two guys from the state of Hawaii squaring off. Tiamo spoke about that earlier in the week. He was very excited, about that. But by and large, here, this defense needs to do the best that it can. Maybe it can leave the game with some confidence moving forward. But for Ole Miss in the big picture, if the defense does get better, if it improves, and the offense is what it has shown itself to be in 2 games, then the Rebels will be in position to win other SEC games this year. They're starting off with not only the best team in the conference, they're starting off with the best team in the country, a team with another very good chance to win the national championship. So this is about do the best you can do, see if your offense is legit, don't have major injuries, try to avoid those, and see if you can come out of this game with some confidence and compete better and put yourself in position to win in other SEC games this year.
Yeah, and looking at Ole Miss, I hadn't looked at their recruiting in quite some time, but I don't see last time I was looking at it, I didn't see a whole lot of emphasis placed on the defensive recruiting, and that's really where they're lacking. Now, granted, they're going to lose some wide receivers after this year. They're going to lose some of those offensive pieces, but you would think that they would be trying to recruit more to that side of the ball on the defensive side, since that's where they're having a lot of the issues. Do you see that as well, or maybe I'm off base with that?
No, I think you're there. I think they have stocked that wide receiver position. They're going to have a transition at the end of this year. They're going to lose some guys to the NFL, some very talented receivers, but they are in good position for several years to come at wide receiver. We're seeing that with the emergence of Braylon Sanders, while DeMarcus Lodge has been out with a concussion. Elijah Moore, a 4-star slot receiver, first catch of his career. He had 1 catch Saturday. It was 50 yards and a touchdown. I mean, there is talent there. There's going to be talent at receiver. They need to continue to recruit there. You like to continue to recruit well at every position, but they have young talent there. They have 4-star receivers committed. Look, when you see this offense, it's not hard to understand why receivers want to play in this offense. So I think Ole Miss is in a groove there, recruiting to that position. And a 4-star high school prospect like Matt Corral signing as a quarterback, same thing. Quarterbacks like to throw it out there too. So they've got kind of a groove going on offense, but they need to commit more attention. Maybe that's it. Maybe more focus, to recruiting on the defensive side. You would think that a coach, recruiting a certain position, that's not where it stops. That's not where it ends. When a staff is all in for a guy at a certain position, they get creative. They go and visit in a huge party. They'll bring several coaches to visit this key recruit. I mean, there's a big sell job. And I think that's where Ole Miss needs to get defensively.
Yeah, and taking a quick look at Louisiana Lafayette, the University, whatever they want to call it, the Raging Cajuns this weekend. I mean, that's obviously a game Mississippi State should be able to win, but it's a little tricky type of game for the Bulldogs. Just the fact that the Raging Cajuns have only played 1 game this year, and that was against Grambling. They got a brand new coaching staff coming in, and they had a bye in week 2. Who in the heck has a bye in week 2 of the season? But the Raging Cajuns had that, and Mississippi State only has one game of film to go off of, and they won that game. They beat Grambling 49 to something. A game they should have won. They did. But Mississippi State does have a little ace in the hole, I guess, to say. Mark Hudspeth, who's the head coach at Louisiana Lafayette for the past 7 years, is Mississippi State's tight ends coach. So he's able to help with the scout. And I talked to him this week, and he was telling me that really all he can really help out with is the personnel, some of the personnel that they have, because it's a brand new offense and a brand new defense from what he was running down there. But he's able to give his input. And then on the other side, Louisiana Lafayette has DJ Looney on its staff. He's an assistant offensive line coach. And of course, he was a former Mississippi State player, and he was actually Mississippi State's tight ends coach this past year. So there's some familiarity on both sides. And of course, obviously, a lot of when Hudspeth was there, they recruited Mississippi heavily. So there's a lot of Mississippi players on that roster for Louisiana Lafayette, and there should be some should be a good ball game. But like I said, Mississippi State should win this one handily, and they'll get into conference play next week, going up to Kentucky.
Folks, that's it for this edition of Double Coverage, a production of the Daily Journal. We thank you for being with us today. We spoke a little about 9/11 at the front end of the program. We'll remember all the people in the path of Hurricane Florence as well. A lot of rebuilding ahead in the weeks to come for those folks. So keep them in your prayers as you think about that storm this weekend. It's already canceled a lot of games, but a lot more important things going on there than that. We thank you for being with us this week. Come back and join us next week.